Hello, my name is Ewan McGahey, and today in Enterprise Law we are talking about the regulation of water. And everyone knows the importance of water, including the poets. W.H. Auden famously wrote once that thousands have lived without love, not one without water. But although everybody sees its importance, our water systems often seem like they're very much unloved. Particularly in England, there is record levels of pollution, there are water outages, Southeast Water just recently this year in early 2026, leaks are rampant, and it looks very much like our water systems are broken. And those problems really begin with regulation. So the key issues that we're going to discuss today is what is the most efficient type of financing system for water, including its ownership. Secondly, who should be governing water companies? And thirdly, what are the best guarantees of price and quality? And as usual, the structure of the talk is going to go through the history, including how water relates to human rights and what the market failures are. We're going to delve deeper into finance, including state aid that water companies got, how they don't pay for pollution, how they sit on natural monopolies, the governance of water companies, including the role of the regulator, Ofwat soon to be abolished, the water companies themselves, and a procedure called special admin, or often used for insolvency, but also potentially for poor water company performance, and the rights that bill payers have, particularly relating to prices and the standards that we've got on bathing and drinking water quality. Now, the technology in relation to our water systems has changed considerably since ancient times. It used to be that, well, it just rained and we'd hope to drink from the rivers or streams and whatever we could collect. But really, human history first became settled and civilizations established. Excuse me, one second. With the invention of irrigation. So something like 6,000, 4,000 BC, we started having societies that learnt how to divert watercourses into farmland. The Romans famously built aqueducts, and that's the way that it was for much of human history. But then in the 19th century, perhaps the biggest stride was the humble flushing toilet, invented by Thomas Crapper. And not long after that, we had the construction of the first major sewers, and that really has been the basis for modern water systems. Flushing toilets, sewers, piped drinking water, and the real challenge is less the technology. Pipes are quite simple, sewers are quite simple, but the real challenge is rolling out that technology to everyone. Of course, there's lots more that we could say in terms of filtration systems, but the fundamentals have been pretty much with us since the middle of the Industrial Revolution. So taking a look at some history, as I mentioned, in sort of prehistory period, we've got the first use of irrigation. Indus Valley in the 4,500 BC is often a starting point. Old cities like Rome, Petra, Hampi had sophisticated irrigation systems, aqueducts, and water wheels to harness streams for power. And as we talked about in electricity, that was a really big source of power for milling and food production right up until the Industrial Revolution and the invention of gas and electricity, or systems to harness gas and electricity. So the big shift, as I say, in water comes with the 19th century. And at the beginning, water was distributed almost entirely through private enterprise. So the first companies that grew up in the late 18th century, early 19th century were privately owned, and they were seen generally as ripping customers off. So a select committee on the supply of water in 1821 identified exactly this, and gradually, slowly, there was more and more regulation over the terms which water companies could impose through their acts of parliament. These were standardised in the Waterworks Clauses Act of 1847. So when a new company was set up, there'd be a model company constitution which did things like set price limits to bill payers, so some regulation of their capital in model clauses for the company. So that was those were the early and really bad days of water systems in the 19th century. What also happened a couple of decades later, particularly beginning in the mid 1800s, was a much wider and better understanding of the problems that filthy, foul water could create. So there were waves and waves of cholera pandemics in 1817 and 1830. They were particularly bad again in 1848. And the last one led to the passing of the Public Health Act, which banned houses without proper drainage. Not long after that, Dr. John Snow in Soho identified that people were getting more sick when they were drinking from a pump that was close to sewage discharge. And he put two and two together and said that, well, cholera was probably coming from filthy water, not as people had previously believed, somewhat superstitiously, the sort of miasmas or the bad air that comes from the water. No, it really was the bad drinking water itself. Now that was 1853, but things were about to get quite considerably worse because Thomas Crapper invents the toilet in the 1850s, and before long, with thousands of people, tens of thousands of people buying new toilets, flushing them down the drain, and all of the sewage going pretty much straight into the River Thames, you had what was known as the Great Stink. So there was so much sewage in the river that with a hot summer, the smell of really the cooking, bubbling, fermenting poo from the River Thames drove people out of Parliament, whereupon they promptly legislated with the Metropolitan Management Act and to commission Joseph Bazalgette to build sewers for London, or using powers under the Act. And so the creation of the embankment along the River Thames, leading out to pumping stations around London, was the direct result of things smelling really bad inside Parliament. Another really important step forward was the Public Health Act of 1875, which said that where councils started to build waterworks, taking away the functions of private companies, water had to be guaranteed to be pure and wholesome. So these were really important in setting standards for clean water for the first time. Now, in the mid-20th century, we began to have a shift from a sort of chaotic system of thousands of private and some public council-led water companies to a much more rationalised system that was designed around the natural shape of water basins. So you did have in 1944 over 1,000 water companies, but 26 companies, just 26, supplied half of the water to the country. There were 1,400 sewerage companies, and 20% of rural homes had no access to running water at all. So the Water Act in 1945 merged all of these companies into much bigger entities and set up a national planning strategy. The Water Act of 1973 said that there would be 10 water authorities, and there was a new national policy for clean water put right up in Section 1. So, from these two acts, you had a system of public water replacing private enterprise because the government recognised that water was best managed in public ownership. However, when Margaret Thatcher was elected in 1979, all of that changed. The representation that had been there from local governments in water authorities was scrapped in 1983, and in 1989 legislation was passed to begin privatising the water companies, and they were sold off to the private sector for £4.9 billion, and at the same time £4.9 billion in debt that the water authorities had was written off, and they started with a very healthy balance sheet indeed. So what are the human rights that relate to water? So there actually wasn't much in the original human rights document, the Magna Carta for Humanity, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. Article 25 does say that everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for himself and his family, including the right to food, but no mention of water. The codifying treaty, the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, in Article 11 repeats pretty much the same thing: the right of everyone to an adequate standard of living, including adequate food. But it was generally thought that water was implicit in the concept of food. Very simply, you're not going to have much food without water, therefore water was necessarily implied as being a human right. And so that's what the United Nations Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights said explicitly in 2002 in its general comment number 15, that water is implicit in the right to food. And the human right to water, they said, it entitles everyone to sufficient, safe, acceptable, physically accessible and affordable water for personal and domestic uses. The UN Human Rights Council also resolves that there is a right to a clean, healthy and sustainable environment. So not just for drinking water, but the waterways, rivers, beaches and seas as well. And when we look at the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations, we see an attempt by 2030, these are the goals for 2030 that should be reached all over the planet. We see an attempt to try and realise this right, but progress is very slow. So it says that we should ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all, that its first target is universal and equitable access to safe and affordable drinking water for all. But in 2022, still 2.2 billion people on the planet lacked safe drinking water. Second target, adequate and equitable sanitation, an end to open defecation. But in 2022, still 3.4 billion people lacked proper sanitation, 1.9 billion people lacked hygiene services. And so that's basically lacking access to toilets and no connection to a sewage network where sewage can be properly treated. Third target is to improve water quality by reducing pollution, eliminating dumping, minimizing release of hazardous chemicals, halving the proportion of untreated wastewater. But in 2022, only 58% of wastewater was being treated. Fourth target, increase water efficiency, reduce water scarcity. Fifth target, integrate water resource management across boundaries. And sixth target, by 2020, protect and restore water-related ecosystems, including mountains, forests, wetlands, rivers, aquifers, and lakes. I think that might be a typo, and it's 2023. But by 2022, a fifth of river basins still have abnormal fluctuations in surface water. In the previous 5 years. So we are still, to say the least, very far away from doing the simple things like toilets and sewers and proper drinking water for everybody on the planet. And this, of course, is increasingly important because of the existential threat of climate damage. So what market failures relate to water companies and water systems? Well, the first, most obvious one is that water is a natural monopoly. The water basin and the rivers are geographically unique, and so water sources in their location are fixed, and the costs of one firm providing water services, piping the water from the reservoirs, running the sewers is much lower than competing firms. There is no need for competing pipes and competing sewers. And so when we look at England and Wales in the map here, we can see that the water companies have geographic monopolies. They're regulated in the UK, but the fact that they are regulated does not change the fact that it is a natural monopoly. Secondly, there are externalities in water, and the most obvious externality is that water and sewage companies regularly discharge untreated sewage when they should treat the sewage twice before they release it into the environment. And so if you leave this to the market, then companies will attempt to externalize the costs of their production onto other people without paying for it. They try to pollute without paying for it, and that is exactly what we see and we're about to see in great detail with companies in England and Wales particularly. And thirdly, you've got information asymmetry, but also more widely, unequal bargaining power between water companies and service users or consumers. So when you're a customer, you are just told to take it or leave it. That's a function of it being a natural monopoly as well. You're in an acutely weak position. You can't negotiate. You just have to accept the terms. And water companies know much more about how to handle water and get water and distribute water than any bill payer does. So with all these market failures, this explains why most countries around the world, in fact 90% of countries, have water in public hands. But as we're about to see, that is not the case in England and Wales. Okay, so let's look at water company finance. We know that when you have a water company in the private sector, they can raise share capital, they can get equity, they can borrow money, debt, but water companies also benefit. They also get financed through state aid, both explicit and implicit. And the biggest implicit types of state aid is that they have not been paying for the pollution. There have been very lax regulatory standards that have not been properly enforced. And the third big thing is that they sit on natural monopolies, and there's really not much you can do about that fact. Okay, so first let's run through the sort of explicit types of state aid that water companies have received. And we're going to look at England and Wales specifically. So in the 1989 Water Act, passed under the Thatcher government, Section 4 and Schedule 2 transferred the water authority's assets, previously public, to successor companies. These successor companies, pretty much what we've got now with a few name changes here and there, then issued shares to the public as the Secretary of State thought was fit. And the Secretary of State under Sections 84 and 85 was empowered to lend the companies such sums as the Secretary of State thought fit, and could also be just giving the money in order to wipe out the debt. And that's precisely what happened. So during the privatisation process, the water company's assets were sold for 7.6 billion, but this is 7.6 billion, but 6.4 billion of that debt was cancelled, or there was aid given, and that would equal 16.2 billion pounds in 2024's a couple of years ago in 2024 terms. So just to give you an idea of how much debt relief these water companies got, how much state aid. Then, since privatisation, since 1989, the water companies around England have paid out to their shareholders £84.2 billion by 2024. It'll probably be over £90 billion, approaching £100 billion. And they built up, by 2023, £65 billion in debt. And there's also interest payments on that debt, and we don't have comprehensive figures, but we do know that the debt interest repayments have now begun to exceed the amount that was going to shareholders. So water companies have become more and more indebted, and the amount that they are paying in interest has escalated. And of course, that money comes straight from bills that everybody resident in England and Wales pays. And it was calculated, furthermore, that with all these dividends being paid out and interest payments being paid out, not enough repairs were being done. The government said in 22 that £56 billion in infrastructure investment was needed. And as a footnote, and we're about to see this in more detail, over 70% of English water is owned outside of England and Wales, including by governments or state funds of other countries. So, although we don't have publicly owned water by Britain anymore in England and Wales, much of our water is publicly owned, just not by our own government, but instead Abu Dhabi, China, previously Kuwait, so on and so on. Okay, so that's a picture of state aid. Now, then pollution. We know that the courts have historically not been very good at taking water pollution seriously. So famous tort cases like the Wagon Mound in 1961, where an oil tanker leaks out into Sydney Harbour, and then the oil catches alight and there's a big explosion causing damage to a wharf. The House of Lords held that there was no remedy available because the damage was seen as being too remote, depending on whether you're looking at the Wagon Mound number 2 or the Wagon Mound number 1, where it was held, I think I'm getting this right, that a reasonable the test of a reasonable person wasn't for breach of duty was not made out. Another case where the claimant did not get a remedy from the courts involving water pollution, also very famous, is the Cambridge Water Company and Eastern Leathers Counties. Eastern Counties Leathers, PLC, in 1993. And here you have a leather company whose toxic chemicals seeped through the ground into the groundwater, polluting groundwater that was used by Cambridge Water. And it was held that the damage was too remote. It was not foreseeable by a reasonable person, so no remedy. And so what do you do if the courts are not giving proper remedies in tort for environmental protection? Well, the only thing that you can do, apart from wait a very long time for litigation to try and change a judge's mind, maybe decades you're going to be waiting. What you want to do to be much quicker is you pass legislation. So we've got in 2010 the Environmental Permitting England and Wales regulations, which came from the Integrated Pollution Control Directive of 2010. Regulation 8 says that if you have a regulated facility, then water discharge and groundwater it falls within the scope of the regulation. Regulation 12 says that a water company needs a permit to run a regulated facility defined by Regulation 8, and that comes from the core norm in the Integration Pollution Control Directive in Article 4. Regulation 35 says it's an offence to breach a permit's conditions, and the combination of Regulations 2, 32 and 36 gives the Environment Agency jurisdiction to enforce these rules, although whether they actually do it is another question. We've also got in the Water Industry Act, Section 94, the fact that if you're a water and sewage company, you have a principal duty to effectually drain the area that you are managing. And the regulator, which is known as Ofwat, has powers under Section 18 to make enforcement orders to uphold those principal duties. Though as with the Environment Agency, whether they actually do enforcement duties is another question. And just in the last year, the Office for Environmental Protection, which, believe it or not, is another regulator that regulates the regulators, wrote to Ofwat and the Department for Food and Environmental the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA, wrote to DEFRA saying that they had not been doing enough to enforce the rules against water companies for pollution. The final sanction that we're going to look at in more detail is that a water company's license can be withdrawn for poor performance, including for sewage pollution, under Section 23, Section 24, and so on, through a process known as special administration. But that has never been used yet. It's a pretty slow picture from the courts, although there's not much in sort of basic tort law and negligence, and we've got this legislation. The signs from the courts, even when you do have legislation, are not particularly encouraging. So in the Crown and Anglian Water Services in 2003, the Environment Agency actually did bring a fine against Anglian Water under what's section 38 of the environmental permitting regulations for polluting controlled waters. You saw condoms and sewage floating down the River Crouch, according to the evidence. But the Court of Appeal took the fine, which was set originally at 200,000, and reduced it to 60,000 because it felt that it was manifestly excessive for a single offence. And that's really problematic because if you don't set fines in a way that properly deter bad behaviour, then people are going to continue to behave badly. We also see in a big tort case called Marchich and Thames Water plc in 2003 that a homeowner who had sewage flowing up the back of his garden failed in a claim in nuisance against Thames Water. He claimed that through nuisance there was a breach of that he should have an action in nuisance for breach of the Water Industry Act section 94. And he also said that Thames Water's sewage was interfering his right to peaceful enjoyment of his possessions under the European Convention Protocol 1, Article 1. However, Lord Hoffman, giving the leading judgment in the case, said that the owners of the land who were complaining, Mr. Marchich, had to go through Ofwat, or the Director General for Water Services at the time, and the fact that there was this procedure and the public body's powers preempted an action in nuisance or tort. He made a lot of fuss about the fact that there could be no duty from tort action imposed upon water companies to build new sewers. Another case where claimants didn't get very far was the Manchester Ship Canal and United Utilities Water case in 2014. This is where Manchester Ship Canal sued the big water company up there for trespass and nuisance because United Utilities was letting treated sewage come out of pipes and discharge into the canal. But the Supreme Court held that no action should be brought because the Water Industry Act implicitly allowed treated sewage to be discharged into the canal if it was from an outlet that was built before 1991, not after it. Different decision when untreated sewage was allowed into the same canal, so same two parties, Manchester Ship Canal and United Utilities, this time in 2024. And it was a claim in nuisance and trespass for discharging untreated sewage into the canal. And the Supreme Court this time, Lord Reid and Lord Hodge giving the main judgment, they held that the Water Industry Act did not bar a claim in nuisance or trespass, where the remedy sought was not to build more sewers, but it was simply damages and an injunction. The Supreme Court distinguishes Marchich, probably overly kindly, saying that there the claimant's problem was that they were apparently trying to directly enforce the statute, which you can't do. You've got to go through Ofwat instead of framing it as a purely private claim in tort law. And here the Supreme Court held that the claim was properly framed and under paragraph 131, the effect is merely to prevent the water company from externalising the costs of its operations by leaving them to be borne by the victims of its unlawful behaviour. And so from an economic perspective, absolutely right. What you've got to do if you've got polluters is you've got to externalise, you've got to prevent them externalising the costs of production by ensuring that there is an appropriate remedy. But this is only a very recent case, and the success of cases before that shows us why we have such a big problem, because there has been manifestly not proper enforcement of pollution duties. A bit more about those duties. A lot of the obligations that water companies have come from EU law. The Water Framework Directive in 2000, first of all, says that under Recital 53, the goal is full implementation and enforcement of the standards that it sets. In Article 4, the environmental goals are to prevent deterioration, protect, enhance and restore all water. Member states should ensure the highest ecological and chemical status possible, so not be satisfied with poor water quality or standard water quality or even good water quality, but try and restore water systems to the highest possible ecological status. Article 5 requires member states to review river basins' impact from human activity, draw up a register of protected areas under Article 6, identify drinking sources under Article 11, and under Article 7, and under Articles 11 and 16 have a programme of measures and strategies against pollution. And then you've got the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, old directive now, 1991. Article 4 says that there has to be treatment before discharge, and this has to be at least twice, so secondary treatment. And basically the theory goes that unless you're talking about an area of outstanding natural beauty, like Lake Windermere, if you have water going through secondary treatment, it becomes safe when it is released into the environment. Not a lake, but probably a river, or into the ocean. You need secondary treatment, and then it's more or less safe. You have more stringent standards under Article 5 for sensitive areas. And treated waste has to be reused under Article 12 where possible. Annex 1 does foresee a very small exception to release of untreated sewage. It acknowledges that sometimes this is not always possible if there are stormwater outflows. And all of these rules are implemented in the Urban Wastewater Treatment England and Wales regulations of 1994. And it makes clear in Regulation 4 that breach of the duties that come from the directive that we've just talked about are a breach of principal duty of water undertakers under the Water Industry Act, Section 94. Okay, so an example of a case applying these rules is the Commission and United Kingdom from 2012. And here, a usual suspect of Thames Water was polluting, and the United Kingdom government was failing to take proper action. So the Commission brought an action against the United Kingdom for failure to properly enforce the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive standards. The Court of Justice held that the United Kingdom was in breach, and under normal climatic conditions, account being taken of seasonal variation, all urban wastewater must be collected and treated. So that was the basic problem that Thames Water has. It was allowing too much untreated sewage to flow out. The argument of the United Kingdom was that the outflows that were seen then were not too bad. It was quite regular, but not much you can do about it. The Court of Justice rejected the United Kingdom government's argument, saying it would run counter to the directive if overflows of untreated urban wastewater occurred regularly. So we don't have a clear metric from the court. But if you've got, if you like, something analogous to a regular and consistent dealing, if you've got periodic recurrence of sewage outflows, not with an occasional storm once a year or once a decade, but it's happening periodically, then you're below the standards in the 1994 regulations, which came from the directive. But what we see is that in the UK, there is pollution and sewage spills all the time. So I'm not going to go through these, but here is just a small number, an edited selection of newspaper articles about sewage outbursts all over the country, fines being imposed, but nothing actually changes. Just 14% of England's rivers are in good ecological condition, or they have good ecological status, which is the one below high ecological status that the directive tells us that we should be working for. Under the Water Framework Directive and under UK law still all there, despite Brexit, there are levels of ranking for high ecological status of surface waters: good, moderate, poor, or bad. And what you can see from the map there is that England in particular is one of the worst performers in Europe. Other countries have problems, but England is particularly poor, and it is currently getting worse. It's not only sewage that leaks, it's just water that leaks. So periodically we see newspaper reports over massive leaks, and you just have to walk around London, keep your eyes open, and you're probably going to see leaks on the streets quite frequently. I can think of one on the main high street near me that happened a few months ago last year, and not long before Christmas there was one 2 streets away. The one on the high street didn't get fixed for about a week, and of course that holds up traffic. The one a couple of streets away potentially threatens homes if the water leaking is really bad. But the main thing is that it's just a big waste of water. And this has continued and continued at pretty much the same levels for a good number of decades. If we contrast other countries, a little bit of investment goes a long way. So Cambodia, which is not the wealthiest country on earth, in 1993 was losing 72% of its water to leaks, but as reported by the Financial Times, in 2005, from then it got the percentage of leaks down to just 8%. And that shows, well, if Cambodia can do it, surely it's possible for Thames Water to do it. But it seems not yet. So here's a data set of water leakage from Ofwat in March 2023. And what you can see there, after an initial period of success in curbing water leaks in the mid-1990s, that water leakage rates have kept almost exactly the same. So no progress has been made despite nearly 3 decades of water companies having the chance to do it but not acting. So if you added it all up, water leaking cost, or would be the equivalent of about £2.7 billion in water each year. So that could be subtracted from bills if it wasn't being lost in leaks, and it's something like 1 or 2 trillion litres of water being lost every year, depending on how bad the year is. The UK has an exceptionally poor record on leaks compared to other countries. We are 7th worst in Europe. We're not the worst, but we're pretty competitive. So you can see the UK at the end of the chart just here, 7th worst in Europe, after Estonia, Cyprus, Norway, Romania, Bulgaria, and Italy. When we look at dividends being paid out, why is there all this pollution? Why is there all this leaking? We see that billions and billions have been paid out in total, and at the same time there are millions and millions in fines. So this table shows the value of fines each year in total to 9 water and sewerage companies, 2015 to 2022. And we can see it ranges between hundreds of thousands to hundreds of millions, depending on how active the water regulators had been and how much they'd been in the public eye. But the really important point about this is not just, that fines are bad, but what the water companies are really doing is taking the fines as part of doing business, because they keep on paying out very large multiples of the fines that they get in dividends to shareholders, and don't do very much to fix the problem. And the last way in which water companies are effectively financed is by sitting on a natural monopoly. So the average cost of providing water to an extra user tends to decline with more people connecting to pipes and sewers. It's pointless to have competing pipes and competing sewers. So we don't leave it to the market. We've got regulation instead. And the regulator is able to fix prices and terms of water businesses. But then you might as well ask, well, if a regulator is fixing the price, there's no competition on price. If the regulator is fixing terms, why are they privatized at all? Why are we giving a private company a monopoly? They're not bound to competition. And they are able to channel away resources, dividends, and interest payments on debt to shareholders and banks. What is it that the public is actually gaining? And I think that the answer is absolutely nothing. The Water Industry Act 1991, Section 11 says specifically that Ofwat can impose conditions on appointed water companies, including prices, whatever it thinks is requisite or expedient. Section 12 gives Ofwat the power to direct water companies. Section 66A to L, which was inserted by the Water Act 2014, attempted to introduce some kind of veneer that there might theoretically be competition by enabling water companies to access each other's pipes at a reasonable cost. But these provisions have never been used because many water undertakers thought it would be unsafe to do so. When we look at what happens in Scotland, where the water company Scottish Water is held in public hands, we can see that water bills are 10% lower, at least in the period from 2019 to 2023, than they are in England. And it's been calculated, seen in a Financial Times article in 2015, based on research by David Hall, University of Greenwich, and Kate Bayliss at SOAS, that privatised water is costing consumers $2.3 billion more a year in their water bills because money is going to shareholders and banks. So it's really not clear why we've got water in private ownership when it doesn't seem to be doing a very good job at all. And we're going to get into more statistics on that as we look at governance. Okay, so the governance of water companies. We're going to run through Ofwat and the regulators, look at Scottish Water, Northern Ireland and Wales. Thirdly, look at the English water companies and how they function or don't. Fourth, compare to a couple of good international models. And fifth, understand how special administration works, either for insolvency or poor performance of water companies. So first of all, under the Water Industry Act, we have a regulator known as the Water Services Regulation Authority in Section 1A, or Ofwat for short, the Office for Water. And it has at least 3 members who are appointed by the Secretary of State for Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. And they're meant to oversee the smooth functioning of the industry. The industry has not been smoothly functioning, and the government is saying that it's going to abolish Ofwat, although what's really happening is that Ofwat is going to be renamed and merged with the Drinking Water Inspectorate and the water functions that are currently being performed by the Environment Agency and Natural England. This is supposed to be one big super regulator. Problem is that Section 2 is not proposed to change. Section 2 says that the goals of Ofwat currently, the regulator should be to protect the interests of consumers, but not to get clean water anywhere. It says that their interests should be protected wherever appropriate by promoting effective competition. The only problem is, as we've already seen, that there is no effective competition because water basins are natural monopolies, and all the companies that run water and sewage services are regulated monopolies. So there is no competition, and it's really not clear how that duty could ever be achieved because you're not going to protect the interests of consumers with fictitious competition. Even worse, it says in Section 2 that the regulator Ofwat has a duty to ensure that investors get reasonable returns on their capital. Again, there is nothing in the general duties of Ofwat to prioritise clean water. Instead, there's a duty to look to safeguard interests of consumers through fictitious competition and get reasonable returns for shareholders and banks. Very far removed from proper drinking water. And that really has been there since the start of privatisation. Sections 11 to 17 are the most important part, perhaps, of Ofwat's powers. They say that it can set licence terms on conditions which are whatever it thinks are requisite or expedient. The way that Ofwat has gone about this is not optimal. To just give you one example, which I think is probably the most egregious, Ofwat has given water companies licenses that last 25 years, and at the very least, because, or in the ordinary case, because Ofwat cannot terminate licenses without giving 25 years notice. In fact, they run perpetually, but if you want to terminate a license, you've got to give a quarter of a century notice. You find this, for instance, in Thames Water's condition O1.1. And we have a big problem with the regulators because, as has been repeatedly reported in the media, there's a revolving door between the regulator, where people do regulation work of the water companies, but then afterwards getting lucrative jobs. One of the most egregious is that the chief executive of Ofwat became a director of Thames Water, getting a very nice salary package. But this creates a really big problem because if you can get a very well-paid job at a company that you're regulating, then you're less likely to regulate effectively and certainly regulate impartially. So that's a really big problem with the whole structure of regulation. In effect, it means that the regulator can be captured by the industry. When we look to Scotland, things are different. So the Water Industry Scotland Act of 2002, under Section 20 and Schedule 3, says that Scottish Water has 8 to 13 directors who are appointed by the Scottish Minister. There's a Water Industry Commission for Scotland, like a regulator, which aims to promote the interests of persons connected to the public water supply and to provide wholesome water at a reasonable cost. So a completely different emphasis in the regulatory goals in Scotland. Wholesome water, reasonable prices for bill payers, and we're looking after the interests of people, not through fictitious competition, but just through the performance of the regulatory functions. But most importantly, Scottish Water is publicly owned, and that means that dividends are not going to shareholders, and there's no incentive, inherent incentive for Scottish Water to run up an awful lot of debt so that it can pay off shareholders. There is, however, a lack of bill payer representation, except through the Scottish ministers, or staff representation. There's a customer forum that can make representations about how the water is being run, but it can effectively be ignored. Now, Scottish Water has a lot of problems, and I don't want to underplay that when you have a system in public ownership, as most of Europe most of the world, in fact, has public water, that things can't go wrong. However, Scottish Water has invested nearly 35% more per household since 2002 compared to English water companies. And it's been estimated that had English water companies invested at the same rate, an extra £28 billion would have gone into improving infrastructure. So that's a paper by Yearwood in 2018. Then we look to Northern Ireland and Wales. In Northern Ireland, I won't say too much about this, but the water system is publicly owned. Wales is a sort of intermediate, interesting case for that reason, because it was privatised, the water system in Wales, originally. It was passed to a company called Hyder, which ironically in Welsh means confidence, but pretty soon it faced insolvency. It was sold to Western Power Distribution and sold again in 2001 to a group of people who are sort of socially minded, organised by Lord Burns, previous chair of the television station Channel 4, who wanted to run the organisation as a not-for-profit. So now Welsh Water, it runs as a not-for-profit company limited by guarantee. However, its pollution record is still pretty bad. It's not the worst if you compare it to English water companies, but it's trying pretty hard. And Wales has a very big land area. They've got comparatively few residents, and so pollution is even more of a scandal when it happens there. Welsh Water has a parent company, Glas Cymru, which is controlled by members who are not accountable to the public. So, this is why it's a sort of intermediate case. Its members of the parent company appoint their own successors through an application procedure. There's no representation for the staff who work, the experts who work in the water company. There's no direct representation for bill payers or indeed the Welsh Assembly, the Senate, or bill payers in any more direct way. But by far the worst system are the English water companies. So in England, all the water companies are privately owned, and they fall into the standard corporate governance pattern, which means that boards of directors are appointing their future successors, boards appointing their mates, subject only to sort of residual power under the Companies Act, section 168, for shareholders to remove by a majority. And we see the same standards reflected in model articles of companies in the UK Corporate Governance Code. So you really have companies that are unaccountable to bill payers, unaccountable to the workforce, and often unaccountable to their own investors, because it's really a closed shop with the board appointing their own successors. Thames Water is by far the biggest company in England. I think it's useful to point out that Thames Water doesn't only cover London, it covers the whole of the Thames Basin, so quite a lot of Oxford and so on. And there have been huge problems. So the latest piece of legislation to be passed by the government, the Water Special Measures Act, allows Ofwat to set different governance rules, but it hasn't been used yet, and don't seem to be plans to change anything about the way English water companies are governed. And the big thing that didn't happen in the Water Special Measures Act is that there is no change to the privatised system of English water. There is something called a Consumer Council for Water, appointed by the Secretary of State, but it has no credible powers except getting information. The government is now proposing, since something called the Cunliffe Review, appointed by the government, that there should be a new water ombudsman that will have power to enforce remedies for complaints that people make. But this all still points, there's a lot to be seen about how this will actually work, but it all still highlights the absence of voice that bill payers have in the governance structure. When we look at who owns water around England, this map shows pretty much that it's everyone but us. So there are a couple of water companies, Severn Trent and United Utilities, that are listed on the London Stock Exchange, but when you look around the water and sewage companies, the big ones, you see time and again that you have other state actors like Abu Dhabi and China, the Chinese infrastructure bank in the case of Thames Water, Malaysian asset managers. You have all sorts of, well, now Thames Water has hedge funds in control, vulture funds from Wall Street. Pretty much everyone that you don't want to be running a water company seems to be involved in England. That is from 2022. Here is a more sort of prosaic list of the shareholders in 2018 and the yearly dividends that each company was paying out between 2007 and 2016. But remember, we're probably up to about £90 billion in dividends paid out since privatisation to English water companies, and the same again, and probably a little bit more by now, in interest to banks. So it's an incredibly lucrative business for anyone who can get involved in an English water company, except for the ones that are clearly failing, like Thames Water. When we look at models of governance elsewhere in systems that work perhaps a bit better or are turning around, we can see a very different approach of including stakeholders. So the Berliner Wasserbetriebe, not the best water company, but it was privatized up until 2013. It now has, since it was brought back into public ownership, a 16-person supervisory board with 8 of those chosen by the Berlin City Council. and 8 elected by staff. So Berlin worked out that even if it had to pay compensation to the shareholders that were running Berlin Water before, bill payers would still be a lot better off if it took water back into public ownership, and that's exactly what it did in 2013. Similar story in Paris. Eau de Paris was privatised up until 2009, brought back into public ownership, and the system that they adopted was to have a board of directors with 13 among them coming from city councillors, 2 appointed by staff, or elected by staff, I should say, 3 chosen by consumer or environmental groups, plus another 2 who don't vote, who are city-appointed experts. And then we go to the Netherlands, look at an example there. Groningen Waterbedrijf, I have no idea how to pronounce that, has a 6-person board with 2 chosen by workers and 4 by the council. So a third workers, 2/3 representing the public and bill payers. And these are, all the different variations of system which England doesn't have because the votes are monopolised by shareholders and the boards of directors generally appoint themselves. When we look at ownership structures around Europe, this is the picture. Main thing to look for or to highlight is where you see red, as you do in the case of the UK. That's a privatised system. Just looking at this, you can get a sense from all the different countries in Europe how little privatisation there is, how extreme England is. The little bit of blue for local ownership refers to Scotland and Northern Ireland. Most countries have water that is publicly owned at a central level or it's regionally owned by local authorities. There are a few that have public-private partnerships in the yellow. There are a few that have delegated management, but the vast majority is publicly owned and controlled because most countries see that they can simply get more investment, have cleaner water, higher standards, lower bills if they do that. And the data bears exactly this out. So what this chart shows is on the x-axis bathing water quality, where you've got the percentage of bathing waters that are rated as excellent. In other words, your lakes, your rivers, your beaches not being polluted, but having excellent water quality. And on the y-axis, you have the annual revenue per inhabitant for drinking and wastewater, statistics from 2021 in euros. And so what you want to be is in this quadrant down here with clean water and low bills. What you don't want to be is up in that direction. And so essentially what you see is that the more you spend on your on your water, the better the water quality becomes. Or actually, no, you don't see that at all. What you the other important thing to highlight is that if you have a country. The other important thing to highlight is that countries with green dots have water mostly in public ownership, over 60%. If you've got a yellow dot, it's a mixed system with public-private partnerships, or some public, some private. And if it's a red dot, like the UK, it's a system that is mostly privatised. And so what we can see is that the UK has pretty bad ratings for bathing water quality, not the worst, but it's also paying much, much higher prices. Again, not the worst, but those statistics were in 2022, and as we're about to see, bills have gone up a lot. So the UK is performing very badly. And within the UK, England is doing worst of all. So what this chart shows, this is a different metric now, surface water qualities, so rivers, not necessarily where people go bathing, but surface waters in general, whether they are the percentage that is rated high or good. And what we can see is Scotland is up near the top as having most surface waters that are rated high or good. England, privatised, is below the bottom, and Wales is somewhere near the middle. And again, I don't want to suggest that there aren't a huge number of problems in Scotland and Wales. They have natural advantages from their size and having fewer residents. Nevertheless, they are doing much, much better. And we can see that Scotland is clearly well ahead, and it's a publicly owned system. It's useful to understand the sort of political economy dynamics behind privatisation. There are a lot of powerful lobby interests that want water privatised because they can make money. So the CEO of Nestle, Peter Brabeck-Lematter, in 2005 said, "Water is a foodstuff. I believe it's better to give foodstuff a value so that we are all aware of it having a price." And Nestle is a big owner of bottled water companies, so brands that many of us will have seen before: Perrier, San Pellegrino, Buxton, Vittel, Poland Spring, and so on, all controlled by Nestle. So the more privatisation of water assets that it can encourage, the more a multinational business like Nestle can profit. It has 100 bottled water factories in 34 different countries. An example of it being successful in lobbying governments to privatise water was seen in a case from Maine in the United States called Taylor and the Public Utilities Commission. In this upheld Nestle's agreement with Maine to take a water source into private ownership for a concession of 45 years, a huge amount of time. There were attempts by legislators to reverse this through legislation, but the extremely well-funded lobbying efforts by Nestle and its subsidiary Poland Spring were successful in keeping water privatised. And of course, the more water that you have privatised, the higher prices will be for residents who want clean drinking water. Now, if you want to bring water into public ownership in Britain, easy way to do it would be an Act of Parliament, but that requires new legislation. It requires government thinking about what strategy it is going to use and how much it's going to pay, if anything, to water companies, depending on their pollution record and their failure to do repairs. There is also, without passing a new Act of Parliament, a procedure by which the government can take over water companies and, if it wants to, transfer them to a new public entity. And this is what we call special administration. So special administration differs from ordinary administration when a company goes insolvent because the main objective is not to uphold the interests or further the interests of creditors, but is to protect the public. So the Secretary of State and Ofwat, with the Secretary of State's consent, can petition the High Court for a special administration order if a company is likely to be unable to pay its debts. So that's the standard test for insolvency, no difference to the Insolvency Act there. But it's also possible to get a water company into special administration if it has breached its principal duty or one or more of its principal duties in a way that is serious enough to make it inappropriate for the company to keep continuing to hold its license. So that's under Section 24 of the Water Industry Act. And a principal duty is defined as any license condition or one of several different sections in the Water Industry Act. Section 37 is one of them, a duty to maintain efficient and economical water supplies and improving mains. So in other words, if the taps run dry, as they have recently done with South East Water around Tunbridge Wells, or under Section 94, provide that a sewerage system is effectually drained, and also the duties under the urban wastewater regulations, which flesh out what Section 94 means. And another big difference, as well as the special administration procedure not being required to uphold the interests of creditors, is that secured creditors do not need to get all their debts repaid. So secured creditors in a special administration procedure are entitled to be repaid appropriate value on their claims, not the market value of their claims. And this results from the Water Industry Special Administration Regulations 2024 in Regulation 2022. The legislation before this said pretty much the same thing in result, but it also emphasised that secured creditors did not need to be paid if paying off the debts would obstruct the performance of a water company's functions. So you can read about that through the various provisions that I've listed below. But the bottom line is that if you are a secured creditor, a charge holder, in other words, usually a bank, you have no right to get your debt repaid in special administration. You are entitled to appropriate value on your claims, and that depends on the public interest. So, for instance, when we look at the European Court of Human Rights case law on what is appropriate or fair value compensation in the public interest, that can take into account a variety of factors. And the factors that are going to be most likely relevant in the case of a water company that has failed to perform its principal duties are things like how much has the company been investing in infrastructure repairs? How much has it already paid to creditors in interest payments? And very simply, if the value or of the cost of repairs and the value that's already been returned to banks and other creditors or shareholders significantly exceeds the cost of repairs, then the appropriate value to pay them, to compensate them, could be very low or even zero. Now, we know that the water industry understands this. They have very elaborate systems of group structure designed to finance their operations in the most efficient way. This is a chart, don't spend too much time trying to figure it out, of how Thames Water is structured. But what you can see is that Thames Water has multiple layers of parent companies. The orange company is the regulated entity, and then you've got financing companies. Often a new company is set up for a new tranche of loans. And the latest loan that Thames Water got was at an eye-watering 9.75% per year interest rate for a loan of $3 billion. What's really happening is that they're sort of staggering on, unable to function like any normal company. So they're getting sort of payday lending rates of, or they're paying payday lending rates of interest on extortionate loans. And we know that Thames Water and other water companies understand that if they go insolvent or if they perform really, really badly, that they can have their licenses stripped and then the creditors get nothing. So this is a chart from an investment bank, which sort of flow chart of consequences if a water company goes down. And right at the end, you can see the red arrow there that it's been advised to all the companies, they know it full well, that potentially there's zero recovery in special administration, potentially for the creditors of the company. And so all this means that if the government wants to take over a company for very poor performance, it can do so, and it can decline to pay water companies, creditors and shareholders any compensation if the repair costs significantly exceed the amount of debt that a water company has. So that means that essentially you could bring a water company into public ownership at very low cost if the government decided to do so. Unfortunately, the government has not yet decided to do so, even with the worst companies like Thames Water and South East Water, where everybody's taps stop running before Christmas and after New Year. Okay, so what are the rights involved in water? Let's look at three different types. First of all, there is right to fair water prices, or at least to not have prices that are too excessive. In Scotland, we see this most explicitly under Section 6 of the Water Scotland Act. Water has to be at a reasonable cost. In other words, it has to be fair, but there is no such requirement for reasonableness or fairness in England. The Water Industry Act simply says that Ofwat can set prices in its instruments of appointment. the latest set of decisions by Ofwat, what's known as the Price Review 24, put water bills up around England by an average of 36%. And this is supposedly it is to pay for more investment, but it also is to pay a lot more money to the owners of water companies. At the last price review, the amount that could be returned on capital to banks and shareholders was doubled from 11 billion to 22 billion pounds over a 5-year period. And even when Ofwat sets water bill limits, water companies can challenge them as being too low by going to the Competition and Markets Authority under sections 13 to 17 of the Water Industry Act. And the Competition and Markets Authority can hear appeals and potentially change the conditions. We've seen it before, but let's just see it again. The UK has very high bills compared to the rest of Europe. It was the 4th highest when this chart was made, which I think was probably 2021 or 2022, after Sweden, Norway, Denmark and Germany. Underneath the orange arrow, there's the UK at the end. But with the water bill rises under PR24, the UK is probably going to have maybe second, if not the highest water bills in Europe. Now then, we look at water quality. So there's 2 directives and accompanying regulations that are useful. So first of all, the Drinking Water Quality Directive, Articles 4 and 5, required there's wholesome and clean water, free from microorganisms. And the Secretary of State, under the Water Industry Act, Section 67, can make regulations on what wholesomeness means. Then there's the Bathing Water Directive and regulations, which requires that the member states identify certain areas as being bathing waters and protect them especially well. An example of an enforcement action against Spain in 2003 was that Spain got €624,000 in fines a year in order to enforce bathing water quality standards. The UK has been particularly bad, however, at the enforcement of bathing water quality standards. So just 66.4% of bathing waters were rated excellent in 2023. And when we look at the European data, that puts us as in the 5th worst place behind Albania, as you can see on the chart just there. Finally, there is a right to have some level of supply. This is made out firstly in the Water Industry Act, Section 37, duty on water companies to connect people who have a demand for water, that they have to be supplied, and there's also a duty to provide effectual drainage. But the water company can require the customer to pay. So there's a right to connection, but there's not a right to be connected for free. On the other hand, there is a right to not be disconnected once you are connected, or having what is called a limiting device installed. So if you don't pay your water bills, you can't be automatically shut off from water supply. And it was held in the Oldham case, the automatic disconnection through a prepayment meter is unlawful. So you can't do what happens with electricity, where if you fail to, you have a prepayment meter, and if you fail to top it up, then the water automatically goes off. And obviously that's important because we don't want people to die of thirst. But very limited rights when you add it all up, and so there is a lot of space for reform. So these are the reform options that we would have for water. First of all, in relation to the water companies, if you want to ensure better standards, the easiest thing to do is to put failed water companies into special administration, make an example of the ones that regularly breach their duties to not let untreated sewage flow out into rivers, lakes and beaches. This can follow a number of different models, Northern Rock, rail track, and the rules were already there in the Water Industry Act. And crucially, it means that you can transfer a failed company into public hands at a very, very low cost. In the case of rail track, paying the special administrators cost something in the region of £70 million. It means that you don't have to pay off the billions and billions in debts that the company has racked up to banks if repair costs are in excess of those. Second of all, a good reform option for the regulator to take is to change the license conditions so that water company franchises expire in 3 years, not with 25-year notice periods. That is how the train operating companies have been brought back into public ownership at very low cost at the end of their term. No reason why we shouldn't be able to do the same thing with water companies. It was said that you needed long license periods to encourage investment, but that theory, of course, has completely failed because there has been no investment, or at least very, very limited investment with lots of pollution and haltages in drinking water. Third thing, which the Netherlands did, is we could ban reprivatisation of water companies once they're in public hands. Fourth measure, require staff and bill payer representation on water company boards, as we see in Berlin or Paris. And do this for the whole of the UK. And Ofwat now has the powers to do exactly that under the Water Special Measures Act 2025. Fifth, impose personal responsibility on water company executives for sewage pollution. It'd probably concentrate their minds rather than fines which they absorb as doing a cost of business. And six, to preserve water itself. There could be innovative solutions like covering reservoirs with solar panels so that they don't evaporate in the summer so much, and you can generate renewable electricity at the same time. Second main group of reforms are to the regulators themselves. So first of all, whatever you call it, ban the regulator, currently Ofwat, staff from taking jobs at regulated companies that they regulate. They can go work anywhere in the world, just not places which create a potential conflict of interest. Second, change the regulators' duties so that they don't have to secure returns to shareholders and banks. There's no other regulatory structure, the electricity regulation, the transport regulation, anything else which requires a regulator to look after shareholder or bank profits, so that shouldn't be the case with water either. And finally, again, whatever you call it, fund the Environment Agency or the new super regulator that takes on the Environment Agency's functions in a proper way. They had their budget cut from £170 million a year in 2010 to £76 million a year in 2020. Obviously, that means that they can't do their job properly. So at the very least, the funding should be put up to an appropriate level. It would be close to £300 million a year in 2026 if we kept in line with inflation. So those are some ideas about how you could fix water.